We try to be the bridge between these people and the healthcare system.
Tonight, an international health organization comes to Montreal to give medical care to the homeless.
We're at the very last hurdle, which is to get the last little bit of money that we need to purchase the land.
One step closer in Toronto for a healing lodge for troubled Indigenous women.
We all know that suicide rate is higher here than anywhere else in Canada, and there are things that need to change for that.
And 3 women are running for Parliament in Nunavut. Tonight we meet the youngest candidate. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. More than 200 people were evacuated to Thunder Bay last weekend after another water crisis in northern Ontario. Officials say the issue has been fixed, but the community's leadership says it's still not safe. Willow Fiddler brings us this update.
The chief of Neskantaga says he won't know until next week if it's safe for his community members to return home. More than 200 people were sent packing last weekend after a broken water pump left little to no water pressure in homes. Chief Chris Munias says the pump was fixed Tuesday, but it's still not safe.
The water pressure is back to normal. They're actually doing some flushing. They let some chlorine residuals in some places, and looks good, but a lot of them has to do with their, the technical stuff, making sure that the results are being confirmed.
Munias says technicians are sampling the water now and will have those test results by Monday. Officials say in addition to the broken water pump, the water hadn't been chlorinated since September 4th. Indigenous Services says there was no evidence of contamination, but still advised the community to boil their water for 1 minute before using.
Because there are no immediate health or safety risks to the community members, the department's advice to Chief and Council was to minimize disruption to community members, knowing that this issue could be repaired in a very short time frame.
But Chief Chris Munias says expecting his community to manage on bottled and boiled water isn't good enough.
That's appalling. That's against our human rights. Our basic fundamental human rights. They're just don't get it. I don't think they, we've been under boiled water advisory for 25 years, and there's been a lot of water issues.
Munias says he went ahead and evacuated Neskantaga because he didn't want to take any chances.
With the advice of the community members and with advice of some of the knowledgeable people, I declared a state of emergency and I chose to evacuate. I don't regret that decision at all.
Indigenous Services spent almost $9 million on water plant upgrades in 2017. Construction stalled last winter, but is expected to be completed next month, potentially ending the longest boil water advisory in Canada. Neskantaga was the poster community of water issues in the last federal election in 2015. At the time, it looked like there was no end in sight for the community with the longest record of bad water. Then the Liberals promised to fix that and all other boil water advisories on reserves. In a statement from Member of Parliament for Neskantaga, Bob Nault says the Liberal government remains committed to ensuring they have safe, clean and reliable drinking water. But of the 42 First Nations in Nault's riding, half are under boil water advisories, including Neskantaga. Munias says federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh called him Wednesday morning.
I told him that, I don't want to get my community in a political fight. I don't want to turn this into a political fight between the NDP, Conservatives, Liberals. It's not about politics. It's about my people, taking care of my people. It's about ensuring my community members are safe.
Indigenous Services hasn't committed any dollar amounts to help with evacuation and crisis efforts, but says they are working with partners to ensure services are available. Munias says he will be in Thunder Bay on Friday to provide an update to the community members evacuated, and will know Monday if the boil water advisory can be lifted. Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
British Columbia is the first province to declare an end to the controversial birth alert process known as birth alerts, which flags a disproportionate number of Indigenous mothers for child welfare officials. Often leads to newborns being taken from their mothers in hospital and placed in foster care when less traumatic measures would help. Joining me now to talk about BC's move is the Minister of Children and Families, Katrine Conroy. So this seemingly came out of the blue on Monday after you announced the end of birth alerts effective immediately in the province of BC. What made your government make this move now?
Well, we've been looking into this for a while, and we're changing the way we work with and support vulnerable expectant parents to keep newborns safe and families together. And we recognize that this is an issue, and so as of September 16th, healthcare providers and social service workers will no longer share personal information about expectant parents, including through the hospital or birth alerts, without consent from those parents.
So, and do you anticipate that this is going to reduce the number of infants who are taken into child welfare care?
Yes, because instead we're going to be providing early supports and preventative services to expectant parents to help them plan and to safely care for their babies after they're born.
And so what about the children who are in care now that were taken on birth alerts? Is there a plan to get those kids back with their parents?
So, we acknowledge that the trauma women and families experience when birth alerts were issued, and so that's, why one of the reasons the practice of birth alerts, is stopping, and it involves sharing the personal information without consent. So that's the practice we put a stop to. And by providing early voluntary supports, we're going to help those parents plan and safely care for their babies. And I just want to reiterate, just make sure it's clear that, the decision to remove a child is never made lightly. And before a child is brought into care, there's a full assessment done of the situation and the risk to the child. And a child is only brought into care if they are found to be in need of protection and in immediate danger, and if there's no other measures that are available to protect them, because obviously no one wants to separate a child and their family. And when a child comes into care, the ministry works with parents, families, and their communities to provide support so that the child can be safely reunited with the family. And we've also, to that end, we've nearly doubled the rate paid to extended family members who are caring for children and youth in care, bringing it so it brings it in line with what's paid to foster parents in this province, and it helps keep children connected to their families, their community, and their culture, while we are also providing supports to the parents so that ultimately the child can be returned to their parents.
There's a very high-profile case that's been covered by APTN in British Columbia, in Kelowna, a case with a baby named, we call Baby H. She was taken from the hospital from her parents under highly questionable circumstances with no investigation, no due diligence. Are you aware of this case, and what's your ministry doing to have this baby returned to her parents?
Well, for too long, there's just been a system-wide assumptions and practices that have failed Indigenous children, families, and their communities. And from my perspective, being a minister for 2 years, I recognize that the overrepresentation of Indigenous children and youth in care is unacceptable. And by law, I can't speak to specifics of cases, of individual cases. But we are making changes in our commitment to transforming Indigenous child welfare practices. We are working with Indigenous communities. We've changed legislation so that we are able to talk to Indigenous communities. We are able to talk to elders, relatives, aunties, when there is a situation of concern that's been raised. And so we are working hard with Indigenous communities to ensure that those supports are in place.
Well, thanks for taking the time for talking to us today about the end to the birth alert system in British Columbia, and we look forward to watching what you guys are going to do to get those kids who were taken under birth alerts back to their families.
Thanks, Melissa. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
It's the 20th anniversary of the Supreme Court's Marshall decision. What it means to Mi'kmaq today.
That's coming up after the break, but first, here's tomorrow's weather.
Starting on the East Coast, sunny day, 20 in Fredericton, 19 for Halifax, 17 and partly cloudy for Nain, 20 for Happy Valley Goose Bay under sunny skies. 24 for Montreal and Saguenay. 23 with sunny skies for Chibougamau. 20 in Quebec City. Sunny and 24 for London, Toronto, and Peterborough. Sunny high of 25 in Ottawa. 1 degree warmer for Thunder Bay with a high of 26. 18 is the high in Sioux Lookout. 13 and sunny for Churchill. Rain and 17 in God's Lake. 22 under the sun for Winnipeg and Brandon. 18 in Princess Harbor and Barons River. Sunny and 22 for Regina. Showers and 17 for North Battleford. Showers and 14 in Meadow Lake. 17 under sunny skies for Stony Rapids. Welcome back. 20 years ago, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Mi'kmaq have a treaty right to fish and earn a moderate living. The ruling is known as the Marshall Decision. APTN's Angel Moore is in Membertou First Nation at the 20th anniversary of the Marshall Decision Nationhood Conference, commemorating Donald Marshall Jr. Angel, thanks for joining us. For people who don't know, who was Donald Marshall Jr.?
Marshall was soft-spoken and known as a reluctant hero. He was wrongfully convicted for murder in 1971 and spent 11 years in jail. He was exonerated. An inquiry found that the justice system was racist. What he went through changed the justice system for the Mi'kmaq people. Then, in 1993, he was eel fishing without a license and was charged by the DFO. Marshall fought for his treaty rights all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, which led to a victory for the Mi'kmaq in 1999.
Big victory 20 years later. What's been the impact?
Well, there has been some commercial success in the fisheries for some communities, but not everyone. There are unanswered questions about the treaty rights and what that means for the individual fisher.
So, Angel, what's the focus going forward?
There is still no full implementation of treaty rights. And the big question is, what does moderate livelihood mean? DFO and the Mi'kmaq are still trying to determine what that looks like. Last week, I was in Eel Ground talking to the chief and fishers about the Marshall Decision. They are frustrated with the access to fish. That they are part of the APTN News Perspectives series about the Marshall Decision coming up.
Well, Angel, we look forward to that Perspective series and appreciate you giving some of this info here today.
Thanks for your time.
The closure of a prominent Montreal homeless shelter has direly impacted the city's Indigenous population. While awaiting additional resources from both provincial and municipal governments, an international aid organization is continuing work with its mobile clinic. They're dispensing medical care to the city's most vulnerable. Lindsay Richardson reports.
As an international aid organization, Médecins du Monde, or Doctors of the World, doesn't see patients out of a four-walled waiting room. Instead, outreach workers patrol the front lines of crisis zones in 78 countries worldwide, deploying urgent healthcare resources where there are otherwise few to be found. But they also work with marginalized populations closer to home. When a spate of drug overdoses and drug-related deaths triggered a public health emergency in British Columbia, Doctors of the World put their mobile clinic into circulation on the streets of Vancouver's downtown east side, offering the same free, confidential medical consultations as those offered here in Montreal for the last 5 years.
Mostly people come, they have many questions about sexual health. Also, they have wounds or things like that, like chronic pain because of their lifestyle. Living on the streets, it's really hard.
As one of the two nurses working on rotation with Montreal's mobile clinic, Jaël Rivard says that their busiest locations are the ones without outreach services.
In some neighborhoods, there is not a lot of stuff, like no food banks or no shelters. So in this place, people are mostly outside, so it's easier to find them. In comparison to other neighborhoods where people are more in squat or they are living at someone else's house.
Montreal's homeless population has grown since the clinic's inception in 2014. A government survey from earlier this year logged over 3,000 visibly homeless people in the downtown core, but the real number is estimated to be much higher. and the problems are compounded.
It's really, really different. We have really to adjust our practice with people we see. We work with people who have experiences many difficulties in the healthcare system, so we try to give them a positive experience.
For the urban Indigenous population, the needs are rampant in areas like the ever-developing Cabot Square. Closure of the shelter, the Open Door, forced the homeless onto the street or into an expanding squat on its now shuttered property. The nearby women's shelter operates over capacity and with few supplies, and homeless men, meanwhile, try to fend for themselves. While the mobile clinic provides immediate care, Giles stresses the importance of continued support and follow-up through Montreal's community groups, many of which are starved for funding. In a statement, the City of Montreal said they've been working for several months on the opening of a new day centre and are, quote, still in discussion with the Ministry of Health, the Health Network and others. And while it's far from a war zone, when it comes to the homeless, Montreal's biggest battles are bureaucratic in nature.
We try to be the bridge between these people and the healthcare system.
Making healthcare accessible across borders and across realities. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
To Toronto now, where the push is on to raise more than $1 million to buy land. If successful, it will mean a safe, transitional place for Indigenous women. While neighbors in the community aren't happy about the project, it will mean a lot to women transitioning back into society. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
This empty lot in Toronto's East End will soon be getting a facelift. A healing lodge for Indigenous women that have been in trouble with the law. Just last month, the building project was approved. Now members of the Native Woman Healing Lodge Society are scrambling to close a $1.5 million deal. That's why they're here brainstorming fundraising ideas.
We're at the very last hurdle, which is to get the last little bit of money that we need to purchase the land. So we're talking to lenders, we're talking to donors, and we're on a last push to get that. We have so much money secured, so much of it is back-end money.
It's a decade-long vision of Patty Pettigrew.
In my work, because I'm also a Gladue writer, I've interviewed a number of women who are incarcerated and written their life stories, and they're horrendous. And so with the right therapy, the right healing, they'll gain their strength and their identity.
The 6-story Healing Lodge will have round-the-clock supports with access to elders, cultural space, and counselors. It'll provide 24 beds for women who are making the transition back into society.
Toronto has a very large Indigenous population. A lot of the women, when they leave, like Grand Valley Institution and that, are dropped off in Toronto. So the area that we have the lodge has the largest Indigenous population.
It will be the first of its kind in Ontario and only the 4th in the country. Kelly Potvin says it makes sense to fill the gap.
We know that women are disproportionately incarcerated. Even though the Office of the Correctional Investigator has called time and time again, year after year, for decarceration of Indigenous women, and that Indigenous women should be moved into community and not put behind bars, not put in prisons.
Senator Kim Pate is well aware of the statistics of Indigenous women in prison and the calls for decarceration. She says the federal government needs to do more to promote community-based alternatives to prisons.
The reality is, though, we need some much more robust efforts to get people into the community. So I think it's great that this group of women is doing all they can to get women out of prison and into a healing lodge. The challenge, as they're seeing, is the resources aren't being put in place in the community, and so they're being left to have to raise their own funds instead of resources being made available that are otherwise being spent to keep people in prison.
The campaign to raise funds will continue until November 15th, the final closing date for the sale of the property. According to Potvin, if the money is raised, shovels will be in the ground on the 16th. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Toronto.
Time for us to take another quick break.
But first, the rest of Thursday's weather forecast. Picking back up in northern Alberta, 19 for Fort Chipewyan and Fort McMurray under sunny skies. Showers and 15 for Medicine Hat and Calgary. Showers and 16 in Lethbridge. Rain and 17 for Vancouver and Victoria. Showers and 18 in Fort Nelson. Rain and 17 for Smithers. Sun's out for Beaver Creek with a high of 17. 16 and sunny for Whitehorse. Sunny and 18 for Fort Liard, Trout Lake, and Fort Simpson. A high of just 3 for Sax Harbor, 8 in Pawlatuck and Fort McPherson, 6 in Baker Lake and Whale Cove where there will be rain, 10 in Arviette, plus 2 in Resolute, snow, and 4 for Arctic Bay. Welcome back. Nunavut only gets one member of parliament, but this year's race in the territory features 3 Inuit women as the faces of the 3 parties. The latest to declare is the youngest, and she sees that as an advantage. With more, here's Ken Driscoll.
And then there were 3. First, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Leona Aglukkaq declared she was running again in Nunavut, side by side with party leader Andrew Scheer. Second, Megan Pizzo-Lyle announced that she was the Liberal nominee for the territory, next to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now the NDP have their candidate, 25-year-old Mumilaq Qaqqaq. Originally from Baker Lake, Nunavut, she calls Iqaluit home now. You might recognize her from this passionate speech in Parliament as a part of Daughters of the Vote.
Support from leaders with power and ability to make change. Where are our non-Indigenous allies? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I took every opportunity that I could, and one of those ended up being Daughters of the Vote Equal Voice, where I got to speak in Parliament in March of 2017. The video got a lot more, way bigger than I thought it was going to.
And now she's in one of the toughest races in the country. Nunavut's 1 seat covers 1/5 of Canada's landmass, and there's no incumbent running. Why is she doing it?
We all know that suicide rate is higher here than anywhere else in Canada, and there are things that need to change for that. I'm a very passionate person, and I stand up for what I believe in. And I think it's really important to see people like myself and people that look like the majority of people in here in these kinds of positions.
At 25 years old, she is the youngest candidate in the Nunavut riding. But in Nunavut, with Canada's youngest and fastest growing population, 25 is the average age of a Nunavut resident. She points out there is a history behind this.
Qualifications of having enough experience or not. I think as well, when we think back to when Nunavut was first being created, most of those people were in their 20s, all those Inuit. When we look at other politics and other political leaders, often they start their political career very young, in their mid-20s.
With the small communities and small population, Nunavut's federal campaign is often like an extended job interview. With Qaqqaq throwing her hat, complete with sealskin flower, into the ring, Nunavut voters now have the pleasure of interviewing 3 Inuit women for the job. The vote is more than a month away, and already, that is change. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Just one more of so many interesting elections to be watching for.
Yeah, that one's definitely going to be a good one. 3 Inuit women for Nunavut.
Like it.
I like it too.
That's your news for this Wednesday. For much more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Dennis Ward, have a great night.
I'm Melissa Ridgen. I'll see you back here. No, you'll see me back here tomorrow. I'm on the road. I'll see you back here on Friday.